The Turn of the Screw is an 1898 Gothic horror novella by Henry James about a governess who, caring for two children at a remote estate, becomes convinced that the grounds are haunted by malevolent spirits. It has received many adaptations from the stage to film to television and even to other forms of literature, or inspiring different interpretations in television as well. One of the most famous is The Innocents. The original screenplay for the film was adapted by William Archibald from his 1950 play of the same name, which was adapted from the original novella. In Archibald's screenplay, it was specifically stated in the climax that everything that was happening to the governess was real, and that there were actual ghosts. However, Jack Clayton wanted it to be more ambiguous and was very unhappy with Archibald's screenplay, and got famous writer Truman Capote to rework the script. He was writing in cold blood at the time, but since he loved the original novella, he took a 3-week hiatus to rewrite the screenplay. Capote introduced more Freudian symbolism through the visual compositions of the film, and introduced that Miss Giddens is experiencing everything through her own sexual repression rather than actual supernatural phenomena. Clayton then brought on writer John Mortimer to give it a Victorian polish. Clayton also pushed to have a sense of claustrophobia throughout the film and have the house be a character in and of itself. 20th Century Fox pushed to have Deborah Kerr in the main role as Miss Giddens, despite the fact that in the original James work, she was only supposed to be 20 years old, while Kerr at the time was 40. Pamela Franklin was cast as Flora in her first film, while Martin Stevens was cast as Miles, who previously appeared in Village of the Damned. Clyde Jessup, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, was cast as Miss Jessel, and Peter Wingard was cast as Peter Quint. Both Alec Guinness and Cary Grant were both very interested in the role of Peter Quint, but Clayton turned them down. Finally, Michael Redgrave was cast as the children's uncle. Clayton wanted the film to be moody and have a very specific tone, unlike the Hammer films at the time, which were very heavy on sex and gore. He took on the project so that he wouldn't be typecast as a British New Wave director, and wanted to try something very different. While filming, Clayton made sure not to have the child actors be exposed to the more adult aspects of the film, so he withheld certain aspects of the script as well as Kerr, ensuring the kids had fun on set for the same reasons. Award-winning cinematographer Freddie Francis insisted on using CinemaScope, as well as at the behest of the studio, and ultimately Clayton relented, but he wanted a smaller aspect ratio as he didn't know what to do with the additional space. He eventually found creepier aspects to fill in the extra space while filming. Francis made sure to get just the right look for the film by using tons of lights and deep focus. He even painted the sides of the lenses black to get a better and more intense focus. In post-production, the film had a heavy use of montages, superimposed images, and cross-dissolves to further drive home the ambiguous nature of the film, and the fact it might have all been in Miss Giddens' head. Clayton was a perfectionist, and heavily supervised the editing process with Jim Clark. He didn't want scenes to run too long so that the film's pacing suffers, as well as the fact that there was a small cast and couldn't cut to anything else. Clayton was very agonized over the final scene of the film, so much so that it almost permanently damaged the friendship between Clayton and Clark, and Clayton went into a rage over a small thing after the film premiered to critics. The film eventually went on to gain $1.2 million in North America versus a £430,000 budget, but the film received mixed to some positive reviews from critics. It managed to receive some smaller awards, but it never won any major awards like an Oscar or a Golden Globe. Despite this, Deborah Kerr stated that her role as Miss Giddens was her greatest performance, as well as the film going on to become one of the greatest and most celebrated horror films of all time, and the only Turn of the Screw adaptation that has received the most scholarly review like its original source material. Now, with this movie, it doesn't really do anything new with its lore like the sub-theme going on throughout this month with evolving and reinvention of lore. However, this film more than makes up for it, as it's one of the most well-constructed films I have ever seen. This movie bleeds exceptional atmosphere. This has got to be one of the greatest executions of atmosphere I have seen in any horror film ever. Almost no other film I've seen invoked this much dread while I was watching. I tend to have a short-term attention span. I blame social media and modern inventions, and I am trying my best to combat this. But my eyes were glued to the screen for the majority of the running time. Deborah Kerr gives an award-worthy performance as the governess of Miss Giddens, but unfortunately was never recognized in such a way because of the Academy's hatred towards horror films. She executes the idea of her character going down the path of insanity in such an intriguing and realistic way that I never doubted her character in the film in any way, and never doubted what she was going through. There are several analytical themes in regards to her character that many scholars have debated. That the events going on in the film are a result of her own sexual repression, as I mentioned before, which I can definitely see now thinking about the film, but I never really thought about it when watching. I was just so enamored with the experience of this woman and the supernatural phenomena that was going on that I didn't really think about the subtext of her character when watching. However, looking back, it's more than obvious. I just love the surface level ghost story so much. Everyone else also does an exceptional job, especially the children. Arguably the greatest child performances I've ever seen. Both are fantastic because they manage to showcase both sides of their character. The actual child side where they act like normal kids, which is kind of understated with how good it is. Mainly because you see in so many movies an exaggerated way of how children act that it almost never looks or feels natural. Here, the kids genuinely act and look like children, that when they do start to supposedly act like the ghosts that apparently possess them, it becomes truly terrifying. On the one hand, it's because it is sexualizing children, which in and of itself is horrifying to watch. On the other, the way the possessed, quote-unquote, children act is a great juxtaposition because of how much they act like adults. Not just a child's idea of an adult, which I think is snuck in there as well, but how they act like actual adults. It's terrifying, intriguing, and absolutely jaw-dropping to watch, especially when these kids manage to hold their own with Carr, who is arguably considered one of the greatest actresses of all time. How the film also executes its own sense of dread and tension is a masterclass on how to do those specific concepts. I was watching this film late at night in my basement, and the scene where supposedly Quint's ghost appears to Miss Giddens near the window gave me absolute chills down my spine in a way that horror rarely does for me anymore. Rarely do I have any horror film invoke the feeling that it's trying to invoke, because I've been so used to watching these films that not a ton scare me anymore. But the ones that do majorly impress me, and I can't help but have endless appreciation and respect for doing that. But even outside of that, even if it didn't scare me, I was just so absolutely impressed with everything going on. The performances, the terror, the story, the beautiful yet creepy cinematography, as well as the exceptional editing. I couldn't help but love everything about this movie. It manages to do so much, and it actually executes every concept it goes for. In terms of the subtext and themes of these characters, hell, even just what's going on the surface, it manages to do everything so goddamn well. I wish I could talk more and more and more about how every little detail is exceptional, but so many scholars have at this point that my opinion and point of view would just become white noise. It almost doesn't matter what I have to say because people who are 20 times smarter than I'll ever be can give a better and more concrete analysis than I ever could. But even with that, I always believe that one's experience is really the only way that I can speak to someone in terms of what I think. When it comes to something this superb, it really only comes down to the experience. Please watch it. I beg of you.